This is Brad Montgomery. Welcome to the Successful, Interesting, and Awesome podcast, where I interview people who are, wait for it, successful, interesting, and awesome. Or at least one of those three. Well, that's close enough to the top of the hour for me. Hello! How are you? Have you been washing your hands? My name is Brad Montgomery. Ooh, I'm excited about today because I get to ask the questions I want to ask to a very interesting person who knows all the answers I want to know about the California wine industry. Please put your hands together. Hit the high five. Hit your keyboard. You're not going to do any of those things, are you? Please welcome to your laptop screen. This is Becca Thompson. How are you, Becca? Nice to see you.
Hi, I'm so good. Thank you for inviting me. This is going to be fun.
Thank you for saying yes. So here's the deal with wine. Let's just get into it.
Yeah.
You have worked with not one, but dos wineries. Am I right?
I've actually worked at 4, technically.
Now we're just showing off. So I'm kind of thinking, Becca, that those are dream jobs. Like, there must be a million people who want to work in Sonoma and Napa, and you somehow got that. How in the world did you get your foot in the door?
Well, ironically enough, it was actually through a youth group connection. So the cellar master that I worked for, I went to youth group with. So we ended up being in the industry at the same time, but I started in Oregon and she was in Sonoma, and got a job as a cellar master in Napa. And when I wanted to try something else and be in a different region of the world, I just hit her up and she said, yeah, come work for me. And that's how we did it to Napa. It really is, so much of this industry is who you know.
Yeah.
And those connections
My daughter, whom you know, just got a job, and after trying all these job lists and all these, putting the right resume together, she also got a job because she knew somebody who knew somebody, and then it just happened.
Right. The world is so small if you actually go out and put an effort. So,
all right, well, let's talk about what you did there, because I've heard you talk about wine, and I know you can go on forever in a good way.
yeah.
What were your job titles there? Because there's this picture you have. I'll see if I can find it on of you. Looks like you're on top of a bucket of wine. So what were your jobs?
Yeah. So most of them were in the actual production side. So I was a harvest intern first, the grunt worker that comes in just to do the heavy lifting during the big season, which we call harvest.
And that you're literally picking grapes, right?
So I wasn't, but I was the one in the winery receiving the grapes, and from there doing all the work to actually make the wine.
All right.
And then I've been a cellar master, which is essentially like the management position within the cellar, but isn't that such a fun title? Cellar master. It's really cool.
As job titles go, Becca, that one kicks ass.
Cellar master. That's a fun one. I was also an assistant winemaker in Oregon before I moved down to Napa. And then yes, there I am.
So what, are you a cellar master in this? That is such a great picture.
That was my first harvest internship. So I had no idea what I was doing. I was just given some equipment and told, all right, you're going to do a pump over is what I'm doing, is moving the juice around as part of the fermentation process. And I just loved every minute of it. I was dirty. It was long hours, but it was so gratifying. And then here in Napa, I kind of started from the bottom again as an intern, and then was a cellar associate. So again, doing all the heavy, dirty lifting of the actual physical winemaking.
I'm guessing with that job and that access in that part of the country, gorgeous. Mm-hmm. You've had other people hit you up like, Becca, how'd you get that job?
Yes and no. I think, part of it is they do kind of ask, like, how did you find yourself at this particular winery where I was working in Napa? Because it is a more exclusive, higher end brand.
Yeah.
And again, it just comes back to who you know. There's so much of the wine industry is this network connection. Like a lot of industries, like the music industry, kind of like with yours too, as you build and are around, you just start to make these connections, and go from there.
What advice would you give somebody coming right out of college who just has a passion for this, and they just heard you say, "Well, you got to know somebody."
Yeah.
Are they? Is it hopeless?
Oh, no, I think there's the great thing about the wine industry and making wine in general too is that there's always going to be a place that needs help. It is all hands on deck during harvest, and there's lots of different resources that you can go look for these harvest internships. And even if you've had the wine before, write them a letter or a note. Chances are strong that you'll find something. And if somebody wants to get involved in the wine industry, I think a harvest internship is like the make or break for a lot of people. You either come out of that going, oh my God, this was amazing, or you go, wow, I'm really glad I get to walk away from that now. Just say that's a thing I've done. Ooh.
Dang it. You think I'm old enough now to think I'm on mute? A jet plane just buzzed right over our house, and I carefully put myself on mute. What I was beautifully saying, and man, did I have some good language in there. I'm assuming, Becca, that you started out and said, like, all right, I'm smart. I can learn anything. I'll allow you to overwork me and underpay me, but I'm kind of betting on myself and assume that you will notice that I'm awesome. When did you realize? Is that am I right?
I think you're giving me a little more credit than I deserve, but I like it. I think, well, part of it is a lot of how I even found out about wine was working in the restaurant industry. And that in and of itself, if you're kind of a career server or a chef, you're used to long hours on your feet, kind of this nonstop onslaught of people and things and multitasking and all this direction. So jumping from that to working production was actually a fun step back. I still had all the multitasking and thing, but I didn't have all the people this time around. I just had the things going on. So I think it's funny. There's a lot of people in the wine industry that have this like cross section with restaurant work. They're very similar in that manner.
So restaurants and actually working in wine. Where did you get your palate?
Where did I get it? Part of it. Genetics, I think. My dad has a very sensitive nose, and I think that got passed on to me. So thank you, Dad, for that one. But I just working in restaurants, I think I had to, because that was part of my job. I had to sell glasses of wine. I had to sell bottles, and I had to know what they tasted like, and I had to know how they would pair with the food that we were serving.
Right.
So it started for me based on just necessity of my job. And then I figured out, oh, I am really interested in this. Right. It just sparked something for me that has led me down this very crazy, tumultuous, but also glorious path.
I've seen you give a talk on wine, and your passion is undoubted, and it part of what makes you so good at it. But back to the restaurant, you have to be able to know what they taste like to sell it. Really? Do you? And here's what I'm asking. Like, I wouldn't know if the person selling me that glass of wine knows what they're talking about at all. They could just give me some words that they memorized off an index card, and I wouldn't even know what those mean. So do you really have to know, or can you just kind of bullshit your way through?
I mean, you can absolutely bullshit your way through. And people do. But I think that's what separates, the people that are just trying to get through and the people that really care. And that's when I think you have really great experiences in restaurants, the ones that you really remember, it's the ones that really took the time and actually cared and did know. Because I think, we can smell bullshit. Like, we know when somebody's just kind of yanking our chain. And for me, at least, I wanted that level of integrity to be like, I want to at least know what I'm talking about or have some semblance of understanding, so that I'm not handing somebody a glass of wine and I say one thing and they taste it and go, that's not at all what I was expecting. Because that just turns into a domino effect down the line of your service and then your tip, which is your livelihood, and so on and so forth.
Well, all right. So can we start talking about wine? Because we're on the edge. We're right there, Becca.
there. Let's do it.
What I want to know personally is how many people really know. Because I have a suspicion that lots of people know a little bit, but of those people, most of them pretend to know a lot. So they use the right words and they have the right choreography, but really they have no idea. And I could substitute a crappy bottle, like I could fill up a nice bottle with crappy wine and they'd be like, do you taste that oak? So you have been all over this. What's your take on how much of this is real? Like how much of the wine snobbery, which we know exists, is people really who are discerning?
I want to say there are more people pretending than there are who really know, but how much you know is such a broad spectrum too, because how much I know compared to you versus how much I know compared to a master sommelier or someone who's been making wine for 40 years, it kind of goes in degrees. And so comparison. So for like anybody walking off the street, then yeah, like some of these people will know a little bit more. They hold on to those buzzwords and just like throw them out when they feel like it, and people don't ever check them on it. But I think I've been fortunate in a way because I'm in these bubbles of the actual industry. Mm-hmm. So for me, most people do know some semblance of what they're talking about. But when you move outside of those industry circles, then yeah, the bullshit index goes way up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've all been at those places, and I'm guessing as a server, you must have just been experiencing them all the time, going like, "Oh, this person is putting on a show for their table to make sure that the rest of the table know how fabulous this person is." But since I know about wine, I'm pretty sure this person has no clue.
Yes, there is. I think you can ask anybody who's ever worked in a restaurant that happens, and that's just people. You just smile and nod and go, okay, so do you like this one or would you like something else? And then you just carry on and go, oh, I roll. And
well, I saw a recent video you put together and you were talking about is cheap wine okay and how much you have to spend. And it blew me away because one, it was a good video. And two, I thought, oh no, she's at a higher price point than I want to be at. What I kind of heard is that you settled down and said like, so around $30, you're probably okay. And I'm like, right. What about Trader Joe's $3 chuck? I want to go way down into there. So
way down, yeah.
I know everybody who's listening to this wants to know: can I drink box wine? Or will the snobs think I'm an idiot? Can I drink $3 chuck? Can I drink sub $10? Or do I really have to go to up to 30? Can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it really comes down to it, Brad, and I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion with other people that are in the wine industry, but for me personally, if drinking $3 chuck, which is now more like, it's not 2, it's like 3 or 4 now, brings you joy and you like it, keep drinking it. You know, if you want to drink Franz, I actually on camping trips, I'll bring boxed wine because it's just easier and it like deflates and then you can pack it down. You don't have to worry about glass. And I don't think about it that way. You'll notice a difference if you pay more, like into that price range, but you shouldn't feel. It's one thing about the industry, I might get on a soapbox, but it's one thing that I don't like is the snobbery, is this feeling that if you're drinking the $10 bottle on the bottom of the shelf, that somehow you don't know better. But if you enjoy drinking it, then what's the problem? In my opinion.
Well, you mentioned you'll camp with a box of wine. Yeah. As an expert, if you're out and someone says, "Hey, you want a bottle or a glass of this crappy wine, or at least inexpensive wine?" Are you going to say like, "No, what do you have? Do you have a beer?" Or are you going to say like, "Hell yeah, that's red wine. I want it"?
I think it depends on my mood. You know, sometimes I'm not in the mood for wine, but if somebody has offered me a drink, then then usually I'll say yes. Because I don't want to be that person that's like, oh, you only spent this much for that? No, thank you. I'll just drink the liquor. That's the thing it's It's the thing I hate. That's one of the things about the wine industry that has turned into a bit of a vendetta for me. I want wine to feel more accessible and more approachable for people.
It is
It is,
terrifying.
yeah.
Here's James Thompson. Oh, wow, what a coincidence that last name must be. Hey, James, what are some popular misconceptions about the wine industry that drive you nuts? James, that is a good question.
Ooh, I think it's there. When you reach a certain level, there is this feeling, and you kind of touched on it already, Brad. There's this feeling of an inferiority complex that people start to internalize if they don't understand something. And then they get scared about asking the questions, or they don't want to, and they feel like, oh, people are going to judge me or look down on me. So then they stop asking the questions, and they stop being curious to find out the answers, and they just assume, whatever, I'm just going to grab this bottle that I know I like and move on with my life. And that's one thing that wine should be for everybody. There's a place for the luxury wines of the world, just like there's luxury cars and watches and so on and so forth. But like, wine shouldn't be intimidating. There is so much to know about it, but it shouldn't be something that people get scared to go to a wine shop to ask a question.
Right.
Like, I hate that. It's a good question, James.
I think one of the problems the wine industry is in, and I will just lay my beautiful expertise on you, is the fact that the price range is literally all over the map, and goes from $3 to $30,000 or whatever, makes it intimidating. They've made their own bed, sort of.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. And you know, a lot of that, and this is where it starts to get complex. And I understand why people do get hung up, because you go to a store and it is, do I really need to spend that much more money on this bottle versus that bottle? Or, the difference between varietals and regions, and some things are named one thing, but it's actually also this thing. Like it is convoluted for sure. Um, but yeah, I think there are ways to move through a wine shop or a wine tasting and feel like you should be able to be open to ask these questions, because then you'll feel good about buying something in a store, and it takes away this stigma of
Yeah.
snobbery.
Well, let's talk about that, because I definitely want to know how to get through a wine tasting, or I'd really also, something that I rarely go to wine tastings, but I'm frequently in a restaurant with friends, and
Mm-hmm.
somehow I end up with a wine list, and I never enjoy that. It just
You end
makes me
up with
feel
a wine
like, oh,
list.
great, they gave it to the guy who doesn't know or care that much. And I'm, desperately nervous to act like an idiot. So let's talk about that. And it's right up here with JR. So I know I'm supposed to be looking for wine faults like pork taint window when I do that silly sommelier dance at the table. But can I just say I don't like this and maybe get another bottle? Well, see, yeah, that's a great question. So JR and I at a restaurant, we
Yeah.
don't know how to act.
I think, with the cork taint question, I think if something smells distinctly like off, like most wines should smell kind of fruity in general, and the cork taint that he's talking about is like damp cardboard. Have you ever had like your basement flood before? Have you actually spilled a glass of water, or like a box gets wet?
Yeah, and what I do, Becca, is I take
Yeah.
that cardboard and squeeze it out into a glass. Delish.
Okay, well then I will send you all of my cork tainted bottles then, right for you, Brad. Um, Absolutely. I feel like, and this comes back to another one of my big pet peeves, and I experienced that so much working in restaurants, were people that didn't like something, be it the cocktail they ordered, glass of wine, a dish, and then either didn't eat all of it, or I could tell that there was something kind of off about the table. And I would ask, like, hey, how is everything tasting for you? Did you like this wine? And they'll just go, yeah, it's fine. And then leave and write a bad Yelp review. And it's like, in that moment, that was the intervention point. If you don't like it, tell your server that. That's, oh my gosh, that turned into such a pet peeve for all of us, anyone I ever worked for. If you don't like something, you shouldn't have to pay for it, and you should be able to get something else. Chances are strong
Yeah.
if that bottle got opened, someone in the staff will drink it. Like, it'll get comped, moved away. Maybe they can sell. That actually happened to me when I was in New York. There was a bottle that got opened at another table, and the server came over to where I was sitting. I was on a work trip with my winemaker and vineyard manager, and she said, "Hey, there was this table. They didn't really like this, but I thought you would appreciate it." And she didn't charge us for it, but we got this like beautiful 1996 Burgundy out of it and blew my mind. So if you don't like it, don't drink it.
How much was that bottle worth that they just turned back? That was expensive.
Several $100 probably.
Several
Yeah,
hundred.
this was at a Grand Mercy Tavern in New York City.
Well,
So
so
probably pretty.
JR and I think are spirit animals, and we're at this imaginary restaurant, and we
Yeah.
just bought a $50 bottle of wine, and we're afraid of you as a server and wine expert because we're afraid. JR, I'm just making this up. Stick with me, buddy. We're afraid that you're going to say like, well, it's fine, and we're going to be insecure about our knowledge and our palate and wonder if it's supposed to taste like this and we should have known anyway. We're going to assume it's our fault. So we're kind of afraid to turn that in. What are your thoughts?
And I want to say that's kind of on the server. Like that's poor behavior on the servers. The whole point of the service hospitality industry is, as much as it sucks of the customer is always right, in these instances, like, even if I might say, I'm like, well, it doesn't really smell like it's tainted to me, but if you aren't satisfied with this bottle, let me get you another one, should be the appropriate response in that scenario. And if the server gives you flack for it, then that, in my opinion, is a mark against the restaurant and the service, against you.
Maybe
And
we
as long,
should.
as long as you're polite and kind about it, you don't need to be, don't be an a-hole, but
Right.
you
Okay.
know,
Well, thank you for that. I get it. I think for me, I heard what you said, and I think you're right on it, Becca. That there is some insecurity, and there's a little of I'm not worthy, and I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know the language. My youngest daughter, Paige, works at Starbucks, and she reports the same thing is true at Starbucks, that people will go through her drive-through, and there are 1,000 drinks with 1,000 more variables, and they're intimidated because they've heard all those jokes about I want the double fat, yada yada, triple shot, whatever.
right.
And they're so nervous they don't know what to get, and they don't know how to order, and they're so afraid they'll mess it up. And that's just for a cup of coffee that costs $3 to $5. But for wine, it just feels more because, like, we're supposed to. So, will you help us
Yeah.
navigate that a little bit?
Yeah. But first and foremost, I have a lot of respect for baristas, frankly, because those orders get just daunting even for me listening to them. Like, how does one even know that they want all of those things? So yeah, I mean, what
Let me give you the scenario.
direction? Help me out. We got
All right, so picture me. I go into a restaurant, and I'm with my work peers, or I got a client or something like that. And so that means generally I'm trying to not look cheap, and I'm trying to not look like a jerk.
Okay.
And then I've got the wine list, and it's got all different colors and all different prices and these descriptions that mean nothing to me. And I'm what I want is to find the cheapest bottle, but then I'm afraid to get like. So can you? I don't even know what are some good questions I could ask to help you, a wine expert, get me some wine.
Well, I think it starts by pooling the table. Like, what does the table want to drink? And even if you get so far as do we want to start with a white wine or a red wine? Sometimes people go, I don't really care, just pick something. Well, they do care. So at least getting some sort of guidance. And then honestly, use your server as a resource, because they should, in theory, know their list and know what they're looking for, and know that there are certain wines that are generally crowd pleasers. There's certain varieties like Chardonnay, like Pinot Noir, Syrah, even if you want something that's going to be a little bit heavier, if you want something more on the white spectrum, yeah, I feel like Chardonnay, Pinot Blanc are all pretty safe. And just ask your server, hey, I'm trying to please 5 different people here. What are some of your favorites right now that like a majority would like? You know, you don't, because wine people get really excited about funky things. You know, like we've tasted so many things that we want to drink the weird varietals or something really acidic or crazy. So you have to kind of keep that parameter of kind of rein in your wine server because we
All
get
right.
really excited. Say I need something that's going to please the crowd, and know, is this supposed to be paired with food, or is this just to drink first? Because that'll also change the trajectory of how you order.
All right, so I love that phrase. I gotta please all these palates here. So we need a crowd pleaser, and we've already decided that we want white or red.
Mm-hmm.
What code do I give you that says, please don't recommend the expensive bottle? Because if you're going to come out and say this one's fabulous, and everyone's nodding their head, say that sounds good, Brad, and I look at that it's on the expensive end, I'm gonna want to cry.
I mean, even just saying it's something that's budget friendly.
No, but I can't because these are people I'm trying to impress. I stumped the wine expert.
Yes, well, I'm just trying to. I'm just trying to think of phrases that I've been told before. It's like, and you know,
how about this? I'm thinking something in the Gallo family.
That's fair. They do have a lot of labels, you know, and some of them are on the lower end. They've got a couple high end ones. You don't want to say budget friendly, or just, you know, that won't, yeah, hurt my wallet, break the bank. You
Right.
just
Well,
be a wordsmith. You know, there are ways that you can say,
right.
or I mean, even if you want to just give them a price range and say,
well, I can tell you what my dad taught me.
what did your dad teach you?
I can't believe I'm giving you wine expert wine advice.
I love it. I learned something.
He brings the waiter. So I imagine I'm at a table. Then he holds up the menu, and the waiter is now behind him. And he says, "I'm thinking something in this range." And then he points to a low price bottle.
Oh, perfect.
Pretty sneaky, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, do that. Brilliant.
Thank you, Dad. Your dad has a good nose. My dad has a trick. It is a thing. Like I'll tell you a story about Scotch.
Ooh, do you like Scotch?
I have some work buddies, and we have this tradition at an annual conference we all go to. We drink Scotch. We sneak into somebody's hotel room and we hide from everyone else, and we drink a bottle of Scotch. Okay, not a bottle of Scotch, but we drink a lot of Scotch. And it has gotten to the point, Becca, where people are bringing more expensive bottles of Scotch, and basically at a range that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, those.
I was telling this to a guy who drinks a lot of Scotch, and he said, "Oh, dude, you just take a reason, buy one bottle of Scotch. It's a little pricey, and save that bottle forever, and put like a medium blend in there, and no one is ever going to know."
No,
so
unless you're like constantly drinking that one label, so they know what the Callan 15 tastes like, and when it's not that, yeah.
So would you ever? I know that it's kind of a metaphor, and it sounds like a silly question, but do you think I could get away with that based on what you've seen?
With wine?
Yeah, with both wine and Scotch, because it's a similar thing. It's a similar question. It's very popular to say, what type of single malt do you have? Oh, this is a bit peaty. But I really think, except for those general words people don't know, and it's similar to the, like, oh, the tannins are just outstanding. But aside from some of the big words, I don't know how much they know.
I would think it's fair, because this you start, that's when you get into the nuance of it all and digging deeper to actually, and that's when you do kind of root out who really does know what they're talking about and who just nods and goes, yeah, totally, and just keeps drinking it with you, and you go, all right, I can fool you, you're you're gonna be a little tricky, but I'll figure it out. Yeah, for sure. And I think, and because another cool thing about wine is that you also have to think about it as there's vintage variation. So, I mean, we're talking about farming here. So each year, the wine is going to be different. So if you might have had a producer that you really like and you're like, that's my go-to bottle, but the vintage changes. So say you were drinking a 2015 Oregon Pinot, and now that's not sold anymore because they're out of it, and you go to the 16 vintage. Well, you may like it more or less because it's a different year.
Yeah.
There are different conditions to it, which is interesting, and kind of what distinguishes it from scotch and whiskey in general is that what I love about that end of things is that they're blending intentionally to keep that house style going. So that Macallan 12 should be the same Macallan 12 right now as it is 25 years from now as they're making it. So, I mean, they're like
Yeah.
the big wine producers, like you're talking about, like the Gallows of the world and Kendall Jacksons, and that do have winemakers who the whole point is that that Sauvignon Blanc is going to be the same year after year after year, which actually is pretty challenging when weather is not the same year after year after year.
I think I'm going to say that next time at a restaurant. By the way, wouldn't it be great to be at a restaurant right now?
I
I
know.
remember those restaurants. Awesome.
Ugh,
But I
just
think
want
it'd be so fun to
to bar. Yes.
be there and just, I'm going to be the one that says, really, 2015? You don't have 2014? All right, here's a good question or a comment. James says,
No.
from personal experience as a server at a fancier restaurant, I'd like to point out that servers also want to look smart, not look dumb in front of guests. So recognizing that the server is just as worried as you is a good step. Yeah, that's a good point, James. I like that. And then here's Scott with a good one. Do you think wine tastes different based on the people you're drinking with? I am convinced that beer is that way. There is nothing as delicious as a Coors at a Colorado Rockies game. That is delicious.
You're
But
drinking. Oh, totally.
Coors in the middle of the winter, not my fave.
Not as much.
So
Yeah,
what about wine?
I think it does, because it also comes down to kind of perception, what environment you're in while you're consuming it. Because if you're like you're saying with the Coors analogy, if I'm drinking a big heavy Cabernet and it's 90 degrees outside, I'm gonna be pissed about it. I'm like, this is not what I want to be drinking right now. Or, versus over a steak, or it's cold outside, or what company you're in. If I'm with other wine geeks, I might have a different opinion about a bottle of wine than when I'm just, out with other friends or drinking it with family. And I'm like, yeah, no, this is good. Or no, this is really great. And like deep diving into it. So perception and your environment, really, really play a part in that. Same thing with food. You might enjoy street tacos so much more if you're like on the beach in Mexico and have the ambiance behind you than at some restaurant that you just happen to walk into and go, well,
Yeah. Yeah, I lived in Mexico. That is true.
yes. Atmosphere for sure.
There was this drink when we were in Mexico, Becca. It's a beer drink called a michelada, which actually is not so uncommon anymore. You can find them now in the States. Are you familiar with it?
Oh yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's a
Good one. Yeah.
salty, limey
Yeah.
deliciousness beer.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In Mexico, they are so much better because it's freaking hot. And
Yep.
that salt is so great. And then you come north, and unless it's a hot day, I'm like, michelada on a cold day, not okay.
Yeah. But I think we're hitting on kind of the core of a lot of the misconception that comes with wine, is that a lot of people feel like wine is its own sort of beast.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways it is, but you see, like, we can make these connections back to food and to scotch and to beer and to other experiences that don't make it feel so other. There's such, and I guess we're getting back to the misconception that wine is also these things. It's become this sort of exclusive, elitist, something you should aspire to. But I mean, wine is an ancient beverage. It's been around since, Egyptian times. Like, why is it all of a sudden something in American society that's like this big luxury thing,
Yeah, that is so cool. Let me switch topics a teensy bit.
Yeah.
Although, let's bring in this question from Eric because it's a good one. Do you see craft wines, which, by the way, I don't know what that is, craft wines becoming more approachable and accessible in the wine market, like some cooperative breweries have become? What's a craft wine?
So if I think I understand the question, it's more. So to dial it back to beer, which, you living in Colorado, breweries are more popular than Starbucks. This idea of the collective. So people making small labels or experimentation or doing something that's not in a traditional winemaking fashion. And yeah, I think there's definitely a market for it, but I think you have to start with a basic understanding of wine first. Like, I think Americans have a better brain wrapped around beer than they do around wine so far. And part of that might have to do just with the accessibility. A glass of wine sometimes is like $12, $13 versus a pint of beer that's six.
Yeah.
So it's something that feels more accessible and people can drink it more readily. Um, and I think it is kind of starting in certain wine markets. So, where I am here around the Bay Area, there are a lot of these small one-off labels or winemakers at big places doing side projects. And that's exactly the craft wine. When
Ah,
in Oregon, there's little cooperatives. People could buy just enough grapes to make like one barrel's worth because that's all they had. And then they would bottle it and label it and either try to sell it or give it away to their friends. And I love that. I think that's something that people could and should do more. But, you know, that makes sense in wine areas, just like the beer makes sense in
I
beer
love
heavy.
that. It's kind of the democratization of wine, right? That you don't have to live in France. You don't have to be a
Yeah,
snob. Just like, let's do this.
exactly. I think it's a good first step for sure.
Let's talk about what's going on in the wine industry now because COVID,
Sure.
that's a thing. I don't know if you heard, there's a pandemic. It's a thing. I don't know if you heard. And
No.
then California, you guys were on fire and the rest of the planet was worried about you.
Yeah.
That devastated the wine industry, but I don't know the details. Like, I don't know why you couldn't just wash the smoke off the grapes, for example. And I don't know if COVID means you can't pick. So, can you tell us what's going on?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I have to start by saying that's a very complex question. So I feel like I'm going to have to unpack it in pieces.
Okay.
Um,
Good, good.
so, so yeah, I mean, the pandemic definitely, I mean, because for me and my experience working here in Napa, that hit us first. And being someone who was in the cellar, I was considered, an essential worker because if I don't show up, the product doesn't get made. And that sort of perpetuated and propelled a lot of fear and animosity towards who has to show up and who's considered essential and what work actually has to get done. And yeah, like you're saying, like in the vineyard too, like there's only so far away you can actually get from other people and still get the job done. So for us in my particular cellar, we decided as we were starting to bottle our wine that we said we're a germ pod. We made our cellar the germ pod and said if one of us goes down, we're all going to go down. And that kind of built that teamwork framework because that's how we were going to get through this was together. And we cared so much about this product because it's more than a product for a lot of people when they're making it because they put so much of themselves and their time into it. And so when a thing like the wildfires happen, well, the first thing too is just, I mean, we lost wineries, like buildings physically were gone. People were having to evacuate their homes. So this home insecurity and where people are going to go and things being on fire around you. Like I spent 3 weeks in the first part of September, the end of August, having to wear a respirator at work, just to work, because that's how bad our air quality was. But we didn't have the option to not show up. essential workers. Same thing with the vineyard crews.
When you say respirator, we're not talking mask like we're familiar with now. What's a respirator?
Think like if you've seen Breaking Bad, like those
Yeah.
big gas, yeah, that have cartridges on the side of them framed your
Oh,
face. Yeah. Having to wear those respirators anytime we were working. I have some pretty scary pictures of the first fire. It looks like a bomb went off. It's just this huge plume. And even in Willamette Valley, like I have friends in the industry there, and because if you think about the way valleys are shaped, they're like bowls. So the smoke comes and then just sits,
oh gosh.
stays, and without a lot of airflow coming through, it just hangs out. So there's the problem of destruction of actual infrastructure and buildings and warehouses. But the big detriment is a thing called smoke taint, which I'm sure you may or may not have heard. And that's where, I mean, think about, I'm going to dial it back a little bit. You're sitting around a campfire and you're with friends and some smoke blows in your face and you get those whiffs of like the burning wood and the char and the actual smell of oak. Those particles, for lack of a better word, when they land on the grapes actually absorb them.
Oh, of course they do.
Temperatures. And then that, and without getting too chemistry nerdy, they bind with the sugar that's present in the grapes. For more or less, I have some friends watching that are gonna get on me about this later. More or less bind with the sugars. So when you actually go to try to make wine from these grapes, you smell that burnt flavor. And think about it, it's not just wood that's burning in these wildfires, it's houses, it's insulation and rubber, and like that is what's getting in the grapes. One
Yeah,
of
okay. That's pretty nasty. I
pretty bad.
have
And when it's bad, it's ugh. I smelled some grapes. They literally smelled like a stale bar. It smelled like a dirty bar. And nobody wants to drink that. And there's not a lot you can do to really come back from that. And when it affects the whole valley, Napa, I read some articles, lost probably upwards of $4 billion worth of
well, you
revenue.
were at a high-end winery
Mm-hmm.
cellar master. Um, is someone using those grapes? Like, is Gallo buying those and making some smoky, smoky Merlot or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different outlets for either the wine or the grapes. And yeah, usually it is these big sort of machinery wineries that have the capacity and just have the pure amount of volume that they can dilute it away. There's a saying that my old winemaking professor said is that the solution to pollution is dilution. So if you have a problem with your wine, if you have enough volume, you can kind of dilute it away. Or some people distilled it and made brandy, or maybe they turned it into vinegar. But usually it's just like in a year that's this bad though, fruit was just not accepted. We just didn't take it. We didn't even make the wine. And that turns into a whole nother complex issue around contracts and what happens on the grower's side. And like a fire has so many ripple effects down the line, and what that does for income. Because vintages are usually a couple years behind just because of aging and the cellaring process. So it's like the loss of income this year won't necessarily be felt for another year or two from a winery perspective. The growers kind of, so insurance has become a thing. Like this is a huge issue for the wine industry right now. Like anyone you talk to who works in the industry, and everybody's got a different opinion depending on what side you're on or like how you were impacted. It's a very hot button topic.
Well, I hadn't thought about the absorption of pollution ever. So thanks for ruining that for me. But because I was thinking, Becca, okay, so it tastes a little oaky and a little smoky. That'll be a novelty in 10 years. Oh, remember
Right.
2020? Can you taste it? Yeah. But I hadn't thought about you're sucking down some pollutants and whatever in there. That is just all kinds of nasty. Never considered that.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes that's the thing. Sometimes it's nice because, with Scotch, the smokiness of the oak is a good thing, but we don't know enough about the science yet to be able to pick apart and keep the good stuff and trash the bad. So it is kind of like it's all or nothing right now.
Yeah, I got
because
it.
we're not there yet. Like, we're in the process of figuring out the science behind it, which is tragic, but also really exciting.
Well, by the way, going back about 5 minutes, of course the wine industry is essential. Hello. Duh.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to ask you a couple questions that are not very related.
Great.
I think that the wine industry seems like the movie in my head is it's idyllic and it's just these wonderful creative types in these wonderful areas, and everyone just gets along like Care Bears. And you're making this artistic, delicious thing, and everyone agrees about it. But because there's so much money involved, I bet it's pretty stressy. Am I right? Behind the scenes, is that a brutal industry?
I think it depends on where you are. It can be. I wish we were all Care Bears singing Kumbaya together, just stomping. I can't tell you, Brad, how many times people ask me if what I do for a living is just stomp on grapes and drink wine all day.
Come on, look at that picture of you. Look at that smile.
It's true. It's true. I was having the time of my life, but there were also days where, conversely, like, I would just be covered in bruises. I would look down and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, my hand is bleeding. And I don't know when that happened, but I just kept going. There's pros and cons for sure. And I think that it does have this kind of shiny illusion behind it, because there's some parts of it that are amazing, like going to wine pairing dinners or hosting barrel tastings, or just drinking bottles of wine at lunch and then going back to work. That's real. That's the thing. But yeah, on the other side of it, especially in Napa, because there is so much money in it, different people will view it truly like a business, and it's a commodity and it's a luxury item. And there's a level of expectation behind that. Like, if you're going to charge $600 for a bottle of wine, the expectation that comes with that is a lot higher than, pulling off a bottle of Yellowtail. So there are parts of it that I love and that are super glamorous, but I definitely have had some high stress, almost panic attack level days, depending on what I was doing or what I was working with, because of the fact that wine is the product.
Right.
And it is a living thing, which a lot of people don't always put those two pieces together. That product is alive. And if you don't shepherd it and care for it, things can turn. And if your wine goes bad, there goes a few $1 million, depending on your carelessness, So it's a little bit about.
Well, I've dabbled in both the entertainment industry and also the meeting and convention industry. And it's the same thing. Everyone thinks oh, it's so idyllic, so wonderful. And they're like, show business is a business, and the show is not much of it. And there's all kinds of exciting, I remember I've worked for my bosses, Becca, are either called meeting planners, or sometimes on the entertainment side, they're called party planners. In their job title is the word party. These are freaking serious people who, whenever you are at an event, they're stressed out.
Yeah.
They are happy party planners.
Right.
No.
I mean, and that's kind of true depending on what time of the year you're in. I've been in some really just high in the clouds moments where I'm like, God, I'm so glad this is what I do for a living. I love this. There's nothing else I would do. And then there are other moments where, like running a bottling line, where things kept breaking and I was having to fix stuff with duct tape and pieces of takeout boxes in order to make something happen. And I was like, why is this what I do for a living? I chose this life, So I think, yeah, you like anything,
I would like to see the picture of you fixing things with duct tape and takeout boxes. Because that is enough specific. There's enough specificity that makes me think that's for real.
I know that was a thing that happened. But all the wine got into the bottle that day, so.
All right, we're leading up to the question that I want to ask, because I have a certain kind of wine, but I'm hoping you can help me with the vocabulary so I can find it. But before we get there, if I go to a big wine store now, I see the categories: Chardonnay, Merlot, Cabernet. But also, it seems, Becca, to me as a novice, that there's another category called wine, meaning like it'll say like California table wine or juicy red wine, which is not a category, right? What am I missing there? Is that a new category or?
I don't think it's not necessarily a new category. It's just a different way of categorizing wine. I think because, if you're not really sure what Cabernet might taste like, or, you're looking for something that's not going to be that expensive, what might catch my eye versus what might catch someone else's eye is like, oh, table wine. Yeah, cool. I just want something for Tuesday pizza. Or juicy red, like, ooh, that sounds good, versus something you're like aromatic whites versus, I think it's, on my end, it feels like covering the bases to make sure that people understand the different categories, but you could technically use both. It is confusing though.
Yeah. So I hadn't thought about that it's a branding thing to reach people who don't know the words.
Yeah.
As once you said that, I was like, oh, that's what it is. All right, so that's what I like. I like California table wine, California red. I like juicy red. So I don't really love sweet wines that are like advertised as sweet reds, but yet I think some of these are sweet-ish, maybe, or Chianti-ish or something like that. Have I given you enough words to describe what I like, or do I need to give you more?
Well, I feel like I have to stop a little bit because there's a common misconception, and I'm really glad you said that, actually, with people saying, well, I want a dry wine. 90% of the wine that's out there is technically dry. What gets confusing for a lot of people is the fact that they equate fruit, like the fruitiness of the wine, as being sweet. And those are not the same. And that's where there's this kind of a hard thing for people to grasp sometimes, is that a sweet wine literally has sugar in it, or what we call residual. It's left over from fermentation. Whereas if you want something that's a juicier red, you might like something that has more fruit body to it. So you might really like a Zinfandel or a Syrah, or something that's going to have bigger body to it. So it feels like it might be sweet, because it's not Cabernet that has a really strong like tannin, which I realize now I'm using my wine words, or the Chianti that you mentioned. Chianti is not something that is traditionally very fruity. Most Italian wines in general are not super fruity wines. And that, I think we could have a whole nother conversation about the difference between flavors and why they have. So if you like these juicier reds, I would suggest, giving Syrahs a try, or the region in France called the Rhone, or Côte de Rhones. You'll see them on the shelves. They're usually blends of a couple different things, but Syrah is one of those grapes. Give Malbecs a try. Malbecs are going to be they've got like a little spice to them, which is kind of nice, but there's usually a lot of fruit behind it. Or now that I'm in California, Lodi Zinfandel is a really good.
Lodi is a brand name? What is Lodi?
Lodi is
Oh,
an area in California that's really well known for Old Vine, Zinfandel.
well known to so many people that aren't me.
And they're usually pretty budget friendly, or they're in this range, like you said. They're
Right.
in this
All right.
range.
Yeah. Well, like, what does budget friendly mean to you?
Well, I'm definitely not in the same price bracket as a lot of the people around me here in Napa. I feel good spending between like $15 to $35. I'll splurge sometimes, and I was actually at the store just the other night, and thought about reaching for a $45 bottle of wine, and I thought, is that really a smart decision considering my financial situation as a seller hand right now? But for some people, if you have the income, $40 or $50
Right.
is not that much. So that's it. That's for me where I tend to land. Although, and this is the amazing but also frustrating thing about wine, is that there are exceptions to every single rule.
Yeah.
Which fuels the curiosity, but also fuels the madness around it too. So I've had some really great bottles of wine that were $8 to $10.
Well, I'm really upset right now, Becca, because after all this talk, I really want wine right now.
I know. I thought about it, but I was like, is it too early in the day? Is it?
I didn't even consider, but hearing you say like you might try a Syrah or this Cote de Rhone, I'm like, oh heck yeah!
I know.
All right, we're getting close to the end.
Yes.
And I'll warn you right now what my question is.
Okay.
My last question is going to be, Becca, what gives you hope? And the reason I like to tell you that, I'm going to just yammer for a little bit to let you think about it, because that really could mean anything. It could be about the wine industry, or it could just be about your personal life, or COVID, or the planet, or whatever. But I do like that. Here's what I learned from you. Dang it, it depends, doesn't it? It reminds me. Say that again, Becca.
Isn't it annoying that it
Yeah.
just it? Yeah, but it's true.
On this very show, I've interviewed epidemiologist a few times, and I just want her to tell me what is safe and not safe during COVID. And she's a scientist, and scientists don't work like that. They say, well, we check the data, and it depends. Like they're the hard rules. And what I really want is for someone to say, Brad, here's what you buy, here's what you don't buy, here's the words you use, here's the words you don't use. But it's an art, and it's complex, and it depends.
Depends on what you like. And you won't find out what you like until you start drinking.
I hate to say it, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to a liquor store today.
There you go.
It's your fault.
Sorry.
Brad, what happened? Where'd this terrible downward spiral happen? Becca Thompson.
Just for the sake of curiosity.
Well, thank you for joining us. I know I don't know if it's happening yet or happening soon. You got a YouTube channel about Ask a Wine Expert. Yeah,
I'm working on it. Yeah, in the
that's
works.
Exciting. So maybe by the time this podcast publishes, people type in Becca Thompson wine into YouTube and find that bad boy.
Working on it. Yep, I will let you know.
I've seen one of your videos. They're really good, Becca.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a work in progress. I got it.
Well, we are at that time. Thank you for being here. We have wine expert, wine guru, smarty pants wine person, Becca Thompson. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is actually something that my father said to me when I was back home for Christmas. And he said, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say in the midst of a pandemic, but for me in my own personal life, every time something hard or tragic or blindsiding has happened, it's always been because I needed to be somewhere else, or I needed to do something else. And I think that could also be, for anybody out there, that taking this bad situation, whatever it is for you that's happened, and thinking about what does this mean of what I need to be doing differently? or where else I can go, and seeing it as something positive instead of something detrimental is really giving me hope in my own personal life as I move through and do this new project and think about, what is it that I need to do? How is the universe unfolding for me? And I think it is unfolding as it should.
What were the exact words again from your dad?
No doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. It's actually taken from an old line of a song from the 70s. I don't remember who made it, but it sounded better coming out of my dad.
This is the same dad with a above average nose.
The same dad, I know. Passed on some good things.
Palmo was listening. He thinks that might have come from Desirado.
Oh, that sounds right. Great.
Thanks, Palmo. Becca Thompson, you're a rock star. Everybody, thank you for being here. I'll meet you at the liquor store. I'll be the guy walking around saying, which one's fruity? Becca, hang out with me just for a sec.
Juicy red.